Hi everyone, here is my Module 8 discussion post for data collection. I figured that it would be easier to talk verbally about my data collection techniques than write it all in discussion posts, so I hope it's not too cumbersome to watch my video. I'll try to keep it a little bit brief. But my students just completed their solar energy unit test this past Friday, so it was a perfect opportunity to kind of analyze some of the data that I collected. So I created this spreadsheet and I blocked out my students' names. But I went through and I put all the questions at the top, similar to the YouTube video that we watched in the module overview. And then I went through and I just gave them a 0 or a 1 if they got it right. They got a 1. If they got it incorrect, it was a 0. And then down at the bottom, I have the question average. So for question 1, the average was 77%. So 77% of my students got the first question on the test correct. I went through and I highlighted some red flags. So question number 5 was a red flag for me because only 45% of my students got that correct. And then continuing to look at some of the data, questions 10 and 12, I believe, yes, 10 and 12, only 27% of my students got question number 10 correct, and only 32 got question number 12 correct. So right away, that's a red flag for me when analyzing the data that I collected from this test, because to me that shows teacher error. If only 27 of my students are getting 27%, I should say, of my students are getting this question correct, either I did not teach the material properly or there was some bad phrasing on the question. So going across to some of their averages, some other red flags that stick out to me as far as their test average is that some of my students scored below an 80%. Ideally, I want my students to score an 80% or above when taking tests because, in my opinion, mastery is 80% or higher. In an ideal world, you want all of your students to score 100%, but that's not always the fact. So some red flags are I have a 60, a 65, and then a few 75s and a 70% of student averages. So I will probably meet with these students sometime this week just to go over not necessarily test corrections, but just review the test and see where we went wrong with some of their answers and review with them, and they'll do a test reflection sheet. I don't necessarily allow test corrections, but I do want them to reflect on why they did not do so well on this test. Maybe it was they did not study, or maybe it was the method that I presented the data to them, and next time around I will present it in numerous ways so they have more opportunities to learn. And then going down, the class average on this test was an 81.59, which is pretty good. Like I said, I aim for an 80% or higher. The other thing that I wanted to show you is my students take their tests on our learning management system, Schoology. Some of you might use it in your classrooms, but I use it for tests almost all the time because it shows you statistics. So up here, you can view the stats for this solar energy test that I gave my students. So total, I have 80 kids on my on my roster. So number of grades for this test so far is 62. I did have a few students absent, and also a few students took it on pieces of paper. So the max points allowed for this test was 40. The highest grade was a 97.5, so a 39 out of 40, and the lowest grade was a 21 out of 40, which is a 52%. And the really nice thing I like about Schoology is it calculates the mean and the standard deviation and the average for you. So while using a spreadsheet is really beneficial, I thought it would be a little bit redundant to put the data in a spreadsheet as well as what I already see on Schoology. So for this test, the average grade was an 80%. The standard deviation was 3.3. The median grade was a 32 out of 40, or an 82.5%. And the most frequently scored grade was a 33 out of 40, which is an 82%. So that's one thing that I really do like about Schoology. It already posts the statistics for you, which is pretty awesome because sometimes creating spreadsheets can be a little bit cumbersome. So to do that for every test would be a lot. So the fact that Schoology does it for you is nice. I can also align learning objectives to Schoology, and then I can see what students master for each objective. But going through, Schoology allows me to see the statistics for some of the questions. So in my data spreadsheet that I just showed you, number 5 was one that had really low statistics. So I can see for right here, only 45% of my students answered it correctly. And then almost 55% answered it incorrectly. So that's something we have to go back. I think the wording of this question was a little bit confusing for the students. So we will go back and kind of discuss that. It says the surface area of the collector in a solar water heater affects the change in water temperature. So I misspelled this, and I think that even though it's a simple misspelling and students could infer, it threw them off a little bit with what to answer. The next one that we noticed in the data collection was number 10. Only 27% of my students answered this question correctly. And this actually was a teacher error on my part. The core that I decided to input the data for in the spreadsheet, they actually did not do the soil part of the lab. We ran out of materials to do the soil part, so we just did the sand and the water. And the correct answer for it was dry soil. So this is an error on my part because the class that I actually did the statistics for did not get to complete this lab. And the same thing for number 12. Only 31% of my students answered this one correctly, and that's because for solar energy, we usually do a lot of stuff outside, but as you know, it's been a super rainy fall, so we've been using heat lamps that my school provides for us, and it's been giving us some skewed data. And even though we discuss in class how the data is incorrect because we're using heat lamps, not actually the sun, students still get a little bit confused. So in our lab, it actually showed that the small black plastic heated up the fastest, but in reality, the largest one would because it has a bigger surface area to collect heat. So this was also kind of an error on my part as well. But it's nice to see the data in a spreadsheet where you can easily pull that up with the averages. So these are two of the ways that I view student data. For the most part, I do use Schoology because it comes, like I said, right up here for you. I have the statistics right up in the corner. Instead of importing everything to a spreadsheet, sometimes this is just a little bit easier. But I did want to show you both methods that I have used for data collection. Another great thing is when you do Google Spreadsheets, Google allows you to do Google quizzes. And when you are doing Google quizzes, it creates the spreadsheet for you with their averages and everything that I showed you in my spreadsheet. So when you do quizzes through Google, it already does it for you, which is pretty awesome. So these are my two methods of data collection. I hope that I met the requirements for this module as far as showing you the methods that I use and explaining how I use statistics. So I'm looking forward to hearing your feedback and also how you guys collect data. Thank you.